All right, welcome. Today we're going to dive into one of the most, well, counterintuitive, but really powerful ideas in personal recovery, the very first step. We'll be pulling from some foundational recovery texts to explore how admitting you're powerless and just surrendering control can actually be the starting point for a whole new kind of freedom. So let's get into it.
One story from our sources just nails the core paradox of addiction with this one line. The very thing the person was chasing, this idea of total freedom, ended up becoming a prison. The more they chased it, the less actual control they had, until the escape itself became the thing they needed to escape from. And that, right there, sets the stage for pretty profound internal war.
So, what makes this trap so darn effective? Well, the sources describe it as a two-part problem, one that gets you in the body and in the mind. First, let's take a look at the physical side of things, which they frame not as some kind of moral weakness, but as a real physical reaction. The sources bring up this really powerful idea. For some people, the body reacts to their substance of choice almost like an allergy. The second they start, this intense, uncontrollable craving just takes over. Another source even calls it a toxic reaction, where even a tiny bit creates this massive disturbance. It's a physical reality that means for them, there's just no such thing as just one.
And this physical thing leads to a really devastating conclusion, summed up perfectly in this quote. The person just isn't in charge anymore. The addiction is calling the shots, making the choices. It has literally become their master.
Okay, so let's pivot to the second part of the trap. If the body is so clearly out of control, why on earth does the person keep going back? Well, it's because the mind creates this incredibly powerful, incredibly persistent illusion of control. And this is what the sources call the great obsession. It's this kind of delusion where, despite all the evidence, lost jobs, broken relationships, terrible health, the person is absolutely convinced that next time will be different, that this time they'll finally figure out how to manage it. This obsession is the engine that drives them back time and time again. This slide just perfectly lays out the twisted logic of that obsession. The sources tell this story about a guy who completely understood his condition. He knew the stakes were insanely high, his family, his career, his sanity. And yet his mind served him up this utterly ridiculous idea that a little whiskey and milk couldn't possibly hurt. The result? Well, you can guess. Another disaster. So this cycle of physical craving and mental obsession, it just spins faster and faster, and it leads the person to a place of absolute desperation. All the plans, all the promises, all the tricks, they all fail until there's just nowhere left to run. This is that moment people often call hitting bottom. And it's not just about what's happening on the outside. It's a state of complete internal collapse. This feeling of being totally trapped in loneliness and despair, like you're in quicksand with no way out. All of that self-reliance has just crumbled into dust. And this leads to a moment of just brutal clarity. It's that final gut-level admission that this is a fight you cannot win on your own. The addiction is bigger, it's stronger, and it's way more cunning than any amount of willpower you can throw at it. And admitting that isn't weakness, it's finally seeing the truth of the situation. And this is where that amazing paradox comes in. That very moment of absolute defeat becomes the first step toward a real solution. The actual work of recovery starts right here, with a full, honest admission of the truth. So the solution starts by admitting two really fundamental truths. First, that you're powerless over the substance itself. That's the physical allergy and the mental obsession we were just talking about. And second, that your life as a whole has become unmanageable. And there it is. Step one, straight from the texts. The key word here is admitted. This isn't about being defeated. It's about finally accepting reality. This one simple sentence becomes the solid bedrock that you can actually build a new life on. So what does unmanageable really mean? And how do you even start working with an idea like that? Well, the sources are clear. It's way more than just a messy life on the outside. It's an internal thing, described as something out of kilter at the core of the self. And this is often where people begin working the step. They start by making a really honest list of all the ways their lives have become unmanageable. They look for the evidence, for all those times they couldn't stop, even when they desperately wanted to. So, what's the immediate benefit of making this huge admission? You might think it would feel like failure, right? But the stories, overwhelmingly, They describe the exact opposite: the sudden, powerful feeling of relief, of hope, and yeah, a new kind of freedom. And here's one of the first benefits you see. A doctor watching an early case described this absolutely stunning transformation. The second the person stopped fighting a war they couldn't win and just admitted they were powerless, a change started to happen. All that energy that used to be spent on denial and control was suddenly free and available for something new, for recovery. And this is that central paradox in action. By admitting you're powerless, you find a new power. By surrendering the illusion that you're in control, you get real peace of mind. By just giving up the fight, you finally discover you can face life on its own terms, successfully, and without all that fear. And this is the ultimate feeling that comes from working this first step. It is just pure liberation. That exhausting, insane, lifelong struggle, that rat race of trying to control something you can't control, is finally over. And what takes its place is a genuine, ecstatic happiness. So the foundation of recovery isn't a declaration of defeat. It's a declaration of truth. It totally reframes surrender. It's not about losing. It's the very first strategic move toward finally winning. The sources show us that admitting you've lost control is the only way to finally get it back. And that leaves us with a really powerful question to think about, not just with addiction, but in any part of our lives where we might be fighting a battle we just can't win. Thanks for joining this explainer.